You've reached the point where you're winning more games than you lose at your local game store, and you know the local meta inside out. Yet when you enter major tournaments or regionals, you feel like a bad player, or even worse, you feel like a fraud. You're not the only person experiencing this, and this is a psychological phenomenon that we'll be exploring in today's video. Welcome back to TCG Psychology, the channel where we turn psychological insights into competitive advantages. Now today we're going to be exploring that transition from being a strong local game store player into competing at regional tournaments and how imposter syndrome might affect us in that process. To do so though, let's have a look at the journey when you start learning a TCG into becoming a top performing player in your local community. And that starts with learning the game. So as you start to initially build a deck, you'll start to identify a few strong combos that you might take to your local meta to try and win in that environment. Those wins turn into a little bit of success, and that's where you get hooked onto competing within your local community. As you continue to play, you start to identify those tiny errors. And what that's doing is you've raised your awareness around playing the game, which is a really good sign that you're learning and developing. But that can be quite a tricky space to navigate, because you start identifying those tiny errors, like maybe you've missed specific combos, maybe you're ordering things in the wrong way, maybe you're missing subtle bluffs that end up losing you games. As long as we're learning from those mistakes, that's where we really start to develop into competent players in our local community and build that confidence to be successful at our local game store. At some point, you feel that desire to then go and compete at a larger scale in terms of going competing at regionals, and suddenly we've got to deal with a much larger field of players. You're no longer in your local community at the local meta, and this is where something known as social comparison can really impact us. So we're going to explore social comparison, what it is, and how we can navigate that experience to ensure that we can maintain a strong showing as we take that transition. So what that means is when we go and play at larger tournaments, what is happening is we're starting to compare ourselves to players at that level rather than players in our local community. Now, if your local community is like mine, there's a mix between players who play competitively and players who play casually. And what that means is in my local community, I have that social comparison of comparing to casual players as well as some more competitive players. When you then take that step into playing against players at a regional level or at major tournaments, everybody is now at the competitive level at that stage. So that means we're now comparing ourselves to players who might be playing into the meta a lot more consistently. And that means we're now have the next level of comparison in terms of it's not just people who turn up on a weekly night to come and have fun, but now there's a level of seriousness to it. Everyone's competing to be successful in that environment. Now that can change your behavior when you're entering into regional tournaments, and you may feel like you have to play the safe route every single turn, whereas at your weekly gameplays, you might take some chances and take a risk in order to push a win across. And in a similar environment, at the regional level, we may decide to take that safe play instead because we feel like we have to make the safe play when there's so much more stake on the line. Now, when it comes to transitioning from your local game store to larger tournaments, what's happening is you now have this social comparison to more competitive players. If your local game store is anything like mine, you've got a mix of casual players with some more competitive players. So there's a mix in terms of ability level and your ability to compare your ability to their ability. So then when you take that step into larger tournaments, the playing field now has a much higher playing ability. So your social comparison is now to that higher standard. Now what that can mean is it can trigger something known as imposter syndrome, especially if you don't perform very well in the initial stages of the tournament, where you feel like you've got to that point more based on luck rather than skill. And this is a natural thing that a lot of people go through. I've experienced it myself in a lot of different areas of my life, not just in TCGs, but I have also experienced it in TCGs as well when I've gone and entered big tournaments initially. The important thing to remember is most people go through this experience of feeling like they're an imposter in that situation, especially when you're initially entering larger TCG tournaments, because there's a lot more at stake and people are playing to a much higher level to try and reach that day two, reach that top cut. Then it makes it much harder for you to see the same success as you would at a local game store in more casual play. Now, what that can do to our performance in these environments is, rather than maybe taking a little bit of risk to choose the winning play, we decide to make the safe play and end up losing more games as a result of that. When it comes to playing at your local game stores, you're very comfortable in those environments and you feel more comfortable taking those risks to make the winning play, which is why you might see a higher win percentage in those environments compared to your initial entry into regional level tournaments. Because when you're making the safe play consistently, you're not always making the correct play in terms of getting that win across the line, and that can again impact the number of wins you receive on that day. Now, the important thing to remember as well when it comes to TCGs is there is a lot of luck involved when it comes to the RNG in terms of the order of the cards that you draw, when you draw them, what your opponent draws, etc. So we can always set up our deck in the right way, be ready to play into the meta, and still just have a poor matchup during the day or have a poor run of draws from the day. And that just feeds into this feeling of imposter syndrome. So what we're going to do is explore some techniques on how to handle that imposter syndrome. So even if you're competing at that regional level, you're still able to be successful and still able to navigate that, even if you don't necessarily get the results that you want on the day. So my first tip for you is to anchor onto your past successes as a way to navigate that feeling of imposter syndrome. You haven't just reached this level by luck, but rather you've been successful at your local game store, and those wins do count for something. You know, not everybody gets into TCGs and wants to play at the competitive level and has the desire to reach those levels. So you've done something right to get to this point where you've seen consistent success at your local game store and you want to step into playing more competitively at these larger tournaments. So what I often find helpful is to have some key highlights that you can think back on in those times when you might be feeling like you're a bit of a fraud. So for example, maybe you have some really memorable wins in your local community. Maybe there was a game where you had no chance of coming back, yet somehow you managed to navigate the game board and take the win anyway. Maybe you won a local tournament. Maybe you had a win against a really competitive player at your local game store. Those are the types of memories that you want to put into this highlight reel to think back on when you're feeling like a little bit of a fraud or a little bit of an imposter. Now, the next tip that I have is something that I find really useful, especially because I have quite a busy schedule, as I'm sure many of you do. So I don't necessarily always have the same time as some of the top players to go and study what the meta is going to be at the tournament. So then when I'm going in and competing against decks, I'm learning about triggers as I go. So obviously in the moment, I'm trying to react and be successful. But if I lose a game because something happened in terms of card interactions that I wasn't aware was going to be in the current meta, then rather than seeing that as, oh, I'm a poor player, I should have seen that come in, now I'm actually thinking, okay, I know what that deck is trying to do. I know what that combo is trying to do. So if I see it later on today, I know what to expect. So I'm using that as a learning opportunity rather than as an opportunity to focus on the fact that I've just made a mistake, especially when it comes to playing against those higher level players. Often they have a lot of time to really study what they're trying to do and what they're trying to achieve into the meta. Which I totally respect that. And if you have that time, obviously that's the best way of going about that. But if you don't, then use that as an opportunity to sort of learn from that in the moment and understand that, okay, this isn't a reflection on my ability, but rather this is an opportunity for me to learn in that moment. My final tip is to remember that the feeling of imposter syndrome is really just to protect you from the feeling and the hurt of losing when it comes to entering these larger tournaments. Now, my suggestion here is to try and let go of that label and just to have fun playing the cards. You know, if I go to a tournament and I lose the first couple of rounds, then that's very difficult to handle. And I've certainly been there myself, but rather than just focusing on the fact that you've had a disappointing start to the day, you can just focus on playing the cards that you love and enjoying the rest of the day as much as you can. Whether that's finishing off the tournament and seeing if you can break your previous record at a larger tournament, or whether that's dropping out and playing side events. Try not to get too caught up on the fact that you've just lost and then that feeling of fraud comes in, but rather try and shift that focus onto going back to enjoying the game, because ultimately, at least in my experience, when I play to my best, it's because I'm enjoying it in the moment while having that competitive edge. And as soon as it starts to become a chore and I'm not enjoying it, then my decision making goes away and I just perform really poorly in those situations. So if you're having these feelings of being a fraud at these competitive events, then congratulations. That means you're on your way to becoming more of a competitive player, and hopefully you'll start seeing more success in future tournaments soon. The most important thing to remember is this is a natural thing that we all go through, and as long as we learn from these situations and continue to work towards development, then you're able to push through that and see more success moving forward. Just like you did when you were new to your local community and you worked your way to being the top player at your local game store. So if you have that feeling of imposter syndrome, then congratulations. That's a normal feeling that you'll go through as you're passing your way through to higher levels of success. Now remember, as you're working towards reaching the top, it's okay to have these feelings. We just need to know how to navigate them, and using some of those tips and tricks from today's video will help you as you continue to work your way up, just as you did at your local game store as you worked your way up to being the top local player. We've got these learning experiences to go through as we work our way through to being the top competitive players in our regional environments. Now, what I'd love to do is open up this conversation in the comment section down below. Tell me about the plateau that you've hit and how you've sort of navigated reaching that plateau, and let's normalize the struggle that we go through as TCG players. If you found this video helpful, do make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and share it with any friends who might be interested. And until the next time, make sure to win the mind game meta.